Thank you. So today I want to introduce a concept that would hopefully help us rethink the way that we engage with equity and inclusion and diversity, right? So I want to renew our minds. And when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion work, it's important to understand that it's tough, it's challenging, it's hard, it's difficult, it's annoying, right, sometimes. But we're doing it so that we can ensure that we're cultivating a space and a place where everyone feels welcomed, appreciated, accepted, loved, valued. Makes sense? And so, when I talk about this, I want to introduce you to some very, very important people in my life. And these folks have carried me and encouraged me through just about everything. All right, so these right here, these are my siblings, my older sister Shay, my younger brother Daryl, and listen here, we used to get in trouble, okay? Like most siblings, we used to play around, laugh, argue, fight, all those different things. And so when that trusted adult used to come into the room, like if something broke or maybe somebody got hit too hard, maybe somebody was crying, and they would come in and they would say, who did it, right? And obviously the obvious response so that you don't get in trouble is they did it, or she did it, he did it, somebody else did it, but it wasn't me, right? Whatever it wasn't me. And so I want to take this concept of how as siblings we used to kind of point the finger at each other. And one of the things that used to always get told to us is when you point one finger, there's three fingers pointing back at you. When you point one finger, there's three fingers pointing back at you. Pause. What I want to acknowledge and I want to bring into this space and into this room is that pointing in some cultures can be seen as rude and disrespectful. And I have to call that out in this space, obviously, because we want to make sure we respect that. And also in my culture, right, and the way in which we use pointing the finger in certain contexts can be considered disrespectful or rude. But in this particular context, we're going to rock with it. And if you don't feel comfortable pointing your finger, please, by any means, don't do it. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your finger and I want you to point it. Point your finger, point it straight, point it at your neighbor, I don't know who, whatever. And I want you to examine this finger, right? So that concept of one finger pointing and three fingers pointing back at you is extremely true because when we look at our fingers, they're pointing back at us. And so what I want us to do is to think about what do those three fingers mean and represent. So the first one is internal reflection. And internal reflection is extremely important. We do it every day. We do it in all of the work that we do, but sometimes we fail to do it as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so when I say internal reflection, what I mean is that you're taking time to understand who you are. Understand your identities, what makes you you. Because your identities and who you are helps shape your views on people and the world. It impacts your bias. It impacts how you interact with others. And so in some of the trainings in racial justice and things that we do, we often start with folks listing out their identities. And it's extremely important for us to list out our identities because we have to own those identities and what they mean. Because again, those identities have already shaped who we are and how we view others and how others view us. So this internal reflection process is an ongoing process that has to happen. In fact, it's so valuable and important that you have to do it to effectively and accurately engage with diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And then you got the second one, which is self-challenge. We challenge ourselves all the time. Sometimes, I guess, like if you're one of those who do New Year's resolutions where, you start something and then 2 weeks later, you're like, oh my God, I forgot I was supposed to be doing that. But whatever it is, recognizing that we have to challenge ourselves to step out of our comfort zone and get uncomfortable and accept that and appreciate that. And for some of us, a challenge might just be doing the first thing of internal reflection. Whatever that challenge is for you. For others, it could be reading a book. It can be engaging in cultural events or engaging with folks different from your own culture or identity. But whatever that challenge is, it's extremely important for us to recognize that we have to challenge ourselves in order to get our hands dirty and move into a place of action with this diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Sometimes I want to say JEDI because it's a new word that I heard, and it's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I really like it, so I might use that a little bit here. But the last thing is about reimagining yourself. Reimagining yourself in this work. For some, it might be, I just got to get engaged because I didn't even think that I would be involved in this type of work. And for others, reimagining yourself in this work is trying to figure out how do we not continue to do the same thing, right? When we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, this is something we've been talking about in many different ways for a really long time. And so it's important for us to think about how can we engage in this work differently. And in order to do that, we have to reimagine how we see ourselves in this work. So I've talked to you about three things, right? So when we're pointing that finger is pointing back at us, we're talking about internal reflection, self-challenge, challenging your staff, challenging you. Maybe you have to step up and say something in places of discomfort or when racist comments are made or oppressive comments is made. Maybe that's your challenge. Reimagining yourself in the work. Now, do me a favor. Point your finger again. So as you point your finger, there's those three fingers that point back at you. We just kind of talked about those. But then there's that index finger and then the famous thumb, right? So oftentimes when we talk about pointing the finger, we're pointing to blame someone else. You can put your fingers down. We're talking about like you're pointing at something. And so let's reimagine the way we point. So instead of us pointing to blame, let's think about pointing to move forward. And moving forward into a place where we have an equitable community, where everybody is loved, appreciated, valued, respected, understood, accepted, their entire body, their entire self, being accepted and appreciated, both in our workplace, in our community, in our society, in our world. So the next time you think about pointing, don't point to blame, point to move forward. Now, the thumb. I love the thumb because it can symbolize so many things, right? Like one, we talk about fingers versus thumb and all that. I'm not going to talk about any of that. But the thumb points down. And I like to look at this as dismantling. Dismantling systems of oppression, dismantling systemic racism, dismantling negative thoughts, stereotypes, all those different things. So the next time you think about pointing your finger, point one more time for me real quick, and then you can put it down. As you point your finger, you're pointing to make sure that we move forward to a place of equity, inclusion, acceptance, love, and appreciation in our community. And we're also dismantling systems of oppression and racism. And in order for us to be able to do that, we have to start with us. And we have to start with us in the sense of focusing on internal reflection, owning our identities, knowing who we are. Self-challenge, challenging ourselves to step out of our comfort zone, do things differently, whatever that challenge is for you. And then lastly, reimagining yourself in this work. So the next time you point, you'll never point the same again, because you'll always think about when you point at something or someone, there's three fingers pointing back at you. What are those three fingers saying to you? Remember this. And also, as you engage in this really tough work, draw on supports. Look at others that are around you. I had my siblings when I wanted to point the finger at them and those three fingers were pointing back at me. So figure out what you need to do and address those three fingers daily because it is a daily concept for us. So everybody point one last time. You have three fingers pointing back at you. Internal reflection, self-challenge, reimagining the work, all so that we can move forward to a more diverse and equitable and accepting community. Thank you.